Hey, this is Jim Pfaff. Welcome to the Conservative Caucus podcast. We got a special version of this today. My friend Steve Ryder of Right Turn Media, who helps us produce this podcast. He and I are going to take some time talking about Dr. James Dobson. Dr. Dobson passed away on August 22nd. As of this recording on August 25th, just 3 days prior, Friday, August 22nd. We both worked with Dr. Dobson. We had really a fulfilling time being part of Focus on the Family when he was there. And in fact, Steve went over to Dr. Dobson's family talk when Dr. Dobson left Focus on the Family. And I think you're going to get a lot of good insights. You know, Dr. Dobson, for people on the left, was a polarizing figure, and they constantly attacked him. We knew the man personally. Steve, even, by the way, even more than myself, because Steve really had some close time with him, as you're going to hear from the podcast. So I think you're going to enjoy this. We present this in honor of a life and legacy of Dr. James Dobson, who we greatly admire and love. We send out our love to Shirley, who's lost her best friend and companion. And we're greatly thankful for her life too, and supporting him and being a positive force in all of our lives. And by the way, just let us know your thoughts and feedback by liking us, subscribing to us in our various podcast platforms and video platforms. And certainly send us any questions you have to info@conservativecaucus.com. With that, my friend Steve Ryder of Right Turn Media and me talking about the life and legacy of Dr. James Dobson. Hey, so welcome to the Conservative Caucus podcast. Exciting one for me today because I got my friend Steve Ryder. We're going to talk about the passing of Dr. Dobson, the legacy of Dr. Dobson, because both of us are focused on the family folks.
Alumni,
absolutely. And interestingly, so some of you already know that I was a national representative for family policy councils at Focus. Doc and Tom Minery asked me to come on board to do that after I ran the marriage amendment in Kansas in 2005. And so I did that, and then eventually founded the Family Policy Council, Colorado Family Institute in all that process, ran the marriage amendment. So, you know, I was on the political side of things in the 501c4 side of Focus on the Family. That's actually, I was employed by the 501c4, which is now Family Policy Alliance. Steve, on the other hand, was involved with production of Dr. Dobson's broadcast on Focus on the Family, the daily show that, I mean, Steve, you talk about massive.
It was the flagship broadcast. I remember, but here's the thing. I mean, we had so many radio and audio products that we were doing between Adventures in Odyssey and Radio Theater and Weekend Magazine and his version that was aired internationally. I was the international editor for a while, so I edited the English speaking version that was aired in South Africa and England and on Armed Forces Radio,
AFRN.
And then something that not many people knew, we were on state-sponsored radio in China, particularly.
Oh, wow.
His commentary. So he did it here in the States and in North America, really, because we were on U.S., Canada, and some stations in Mexico, English-speaking stations in Mexico. But he did a 60-second James Dobson Family Minute, and then he did the Dr. James Dobson Family Commentary, which was a 2.5-minute commentary. Mm-hmm. We took those commentaries, translated them into Mandarin and Cantonese, and aired them in China, particularly in supermarkets. And so obviously, because of the whole, no religion thing, we took the secular ones, the ones that just had biblical foundation, but really didn't talk about Jesus.
Right.
And we took those about marriage and parenting, and we aired them in these supermarkets across China. And at one point, I remember, I think we were reaching 600 million people per day, which is crazy. was
Well, and I think internationally, the top number of stations that ended up, or worldwide, that ended up carrying the Focus on the Family broadcast was somewhere on the order, like, I don't know, 1,700, 1,800, something like that. I mean, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was
huge.
a large number. And here in the U.S., I was just doing an interview, and the host said that he remembered something like 4,000 stations, U.S., Canada, and outside internationally. So, I mean, it was,
man, I always heard like 1,800, but it was huge. And when I was there and you were there, Focus on the Family had something on the order of $140 million budget. I know when I first came on, there were 1,400 employees there in Colorado Springs.
At its peak, it was, I believe it was 1,900 employees and volunteers, almost 2,000 people. I remember those monthly chapels being packed. And if you didn't get there early enough, you were sitting over in the other cafeteria over in the International Building watching via video feed.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, and those were important times, by the way, of getting together as an organization and talking. They were fun often. That they were there would be special guests unannounced quite often. And I still see, and Sue McFadden was HB London's secretary, and she's now Jim Daly's secretary. She will often put things, and you know how she has such a wry sense of humor. But she'll show herself doing quirky things that supposedly she's not supposed to be doing during chapels, and I mean, it's just really funny.
I remember I think it was right before I started in '97.
Yeah,
Chuck Swindoll was in town, and he rode in on a motorcycle.
Wow.
And just, it was fun.
Oh,
and Doc's sense of something most people don't know is Doc had a sense of humor.
Yeah.
And he was funny, and so was HB, his first cousin. Both Doc and his cousin HB were only children, and so they were like brothers growing up.
Yep. And for those who don't know, HB London ran the pastoral ministry section of Focus on the Family, which was a really not insignificant operation. And Doc begged him to come in and do that. They were still based in Anaheim at the time. And he was a pastor up in Bend, Oregon.
I thought it was Pasadena. Was he in Bend at the time?
He had been a pastor in Oregon for a long time, and then he came down to be a pastor in Pasadena, and then he was asked to come over and go into the ministry. So he had been like 30 years as a pastor, total time. And Sue was his Sue McFadden was his secretary through all those years. It just came right with him to Focus on the Family. And
really, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah.
I didn't know that she was there before. I loved H. He was such an amazing human being. And I worked with H closely on the Pastor to Pastor tape series.
Yep.
The monthly cassette and CD series that they would send out to pastors. And I absolutely adored the guy. I mean, in 2000, Focus lent me really to Billy Graham Evangelical Association to help with the setup and tear down and the recording of the Amsterdam 2000 conference.
Oh, wow.
HB came out. And so I hung out with H there, and the team at BGEA let me go take a day off from recording. They were like, yeah, you've been awesome. Go take a day and go hang out with H. And he and we walked the red light district together. We walked around Amsterdam, and then we went to Haarlem to go see Corrie ten Boom's house.
Oh, wow.
And for those that don't know, Corrie ten Boom, just a pillar of the faith, who her parents hid Jews in their home. And I think The Hiding Place was the name of the book. And so we went to the Ten Boom watch. They had a jewelry and watch shop. And then upstairs was their home. And they had a hidden secret room where they hid Jews, and were eventually caught and taken to the concentration camps.
They were almost like the old railroad during slave years in the United States. They'd have them stay there and help them get out, and in occupied Netherlands, and huge story.
I've got a picture of H and I back in that room, the two of us, and I absolutely loved the dude. He was a both men were very critical and impactful in my life.
Listen, very impactful. H was almost like a father to me. I mean, we would have lunch regularly. He really helped me work through a lot of things that I was dealing with, trying to, really, during the marriage amendment in particular, and how to connect with pastors well and doing it in an effective, appropriate way. And, but Dr. Dobson, I worked really close with him. And, I think there's a lot of discussion that's been taking place about Dr. Dobson as, since he passed on Friday. What is that? The 23rd, I guess it was. 5, 4, 3, 2, the 22nd.
22nd.
And we're doing this on Monday, the 25th, by the way, of August, 2025. But anyway, a lot of discussion. I think mostly positive, but there were ways that people thought of him to be controversial. And frankly, it wasn't just because of the political stuff that he talked about.
That's what I expected it a lot to be about, his stance on traditional marriage.
Exactly.
And opposition to same-sex marriage. Instead, everything I saw was about his stance on corporal punishment, spanking. I don't know about you, what you saw.
Yeah. Yeah, and listen, certainly the political stuff was there. I mean, I was hired to do and just to define for those in the church who are sitting there. Yeah, I hate everything political. Let me just fill you in real quickly on some definitional things here. Everything you do is political. You're political at work. You have to navigate having a boss. You have to navigate growing your career if you're in the corporate world. Political is just what we do to try to interact through certain situations. There just happens to be the government aspect of politics, and there's private politics. But, so everything's kind of political. And like I always say, working in politics for more than 30 years, this political thing would be easy if I didn't have to deal with people. So essentially doing politics is dealing with people. And when people get controversial over Dr. Dobson taking a stand on public policy, I always felt, man, what are you talking about? Everything the government does affects your life. Everything that they decide to do. And this is why the more libertarian, limited government mindset needs to be in the church more, because government injects itself in your life. When it doesn't inject into your life, then they don't change your lifestyle. And this is why Dr. Dobson was always so concerned eventually. But to back up a little bit, and we'll get more into that. The reason that the corporal punishment thing and all that was such a key aspect of who Doctor's public persona was and what he did in public is because his book Dare to Discipline is what started this whole thing. He was looking at the last in the late 1970s at the effects of the Dr. Spock books. And for those who don't know, Dr. Spock was also, I think, a child psychologist, but he was speaking as to discipline of children. And he had advocated for not doing corporal punishment, not doing any kind of punishment to kids. You're just supposed to nurture them through life and so forth. And also that the more he was not quite an atheist, maybe agnostic, but he was secularist is really what he was. He was like, take all these moral paradigms out of the process, because that just overwhelms children. You need to back away. And Dr. Dobson was watching the results of the family up to that time as a child psychologist, as a trained child psychologist
at USC School of Medicine,
USC Medical
and
School,
Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. That's where he worked.
Done many major research projects that were significant. Like a lot of people don't know, before his public coming out party, I guess you could say, with Dare to Discipline, he had already for more than a decade been one of the top researchers in child psychology in the country at one of the top research medical schools in the country. And so he didn't come into this with no knowledge. His skill as a psychologist was tremendously deep and purposeful. And so he writes Dare to Discipline, and it just becomes a phenomenon. It sells everywhere. And he suddenly starts, and we're kind of cutting some of the story short, but he suddenly started doing the Focus on the Family broadcast, which led to Focus on the Family, the organization. So that's really the foundation of this. And it was a real cultural phenomenon that he was opposing Dr. Spock as a trained psychologist, as an authority on the issues, and promoting the Christian ideal of family and marriage.
Yeah. So Dare to Discipline came out in 1970, and he started speaking, and he started doing these seminars all around the nation called Focus on the Family. He started to notice, and his dad started to notice, that it was taking him away from his family too much. And his dad implored him, you need to figure out something else, something else in order to be there for your family. Because when Doc was probably, I want to say 11, 12, 13, maybe 14 at the most, he was starting to rebel a little bit because his dad was an itinerant evangelist and had all of these just meetings scheduled. He was always traveling. And Doc ended up, as young Jimmy, just openly defiant of his mom. His mom was like, you're doing this and you shouldn't be doing this. And he's like, well, I'm going to do this. What are you going to do? And so mom called dad and said, I need you here. And dad, Dr. Dobson's dad, canceled 4 years worth of trips so that way he'd be there, took a small a pastor job at a tiny church in South Texas, and took Doc out. Jim, really, at the time, took him out fishing, hunting, spending time with him. And Doc talked often about how impactful that was. And he saw that his dad saw with him touring around like this, the same things happening. You need to be there for your kids. And so he looked at, how do I do this? And it was fortuitous in a way, it was divinely planned to record that seminar and distribute those films across the nation to churches. So that way churches could do these small group meetings or large group meetings going over this curriculum called Focus on the Family. And when he did it, that's when he created the organization in 1977 called Focus on the Family. And he had an opportunity either to go into TV or to go into radio. And he and his dad and people around him were praying, and really it just felt like radio was real. It was cheaper. And it was just the way in which you could really impact people more, because people can listen while they're driving. They can listen while they're working around the house. They can listen while they're getting ready for work in the morning. They can listen while they're making dinner at night.
Yeah.
And it started as a weekly show and quickly became a daily show. And one of the things I really appreciated about Doc is he had this sense of this ability to kind of see things the way they were starting to happen. And he realized the way it started was just Doc and his co-host Flo at the time, and then eventually became Gil Meggerly. Mm-hmm. I forget Flo's last name, but he realized that as the host, he was eventually going to run out of things to say, and he started bringing in guests, and he used his big growing platform to spotlight other ministries like Moms in Touch and Mothers of Preschoolers and these other organizations that he really felt were doing good things, and give them a platform so that way they could, get their message out. And
you talk about a growing platform. Like, he started on something like 38 stations and immediately exploded to 300 within about a year or two, something like that. And then ultimately in the United States, he was on well over 600 stations. Like, I think actually nearly 1,000 stations around the country. What's interesting is, Rush Limbaugh is really the guy who put radio on the map in a broad sense. But Christian radio's on the map because of Dr. Dobson, ultimately. Because people would flock to Christian stations, which is most of the stations that he was on. And just be speaking to families every day. I can't tell you, like when I was a kid, I hadn't heard of him, and I didn't come to Christ till I was 16 years old, and immediately started getting introduced to him. That was in the early 80s. But as I was just growing up as an adult and beginning a family, everyone I knew was affected by Dr. Dobson. Christians would talk about what Dr. Dobson had just said that week on something. I mean, you would have that kind of a conversation on a regular basis, just like people more broadly in the conservative movement would talk about what Rush Limbaugh was talking about. And I know Rush Limbaugh had deep respect for Dr. Dobson, great respect for him. But these people, we talk about Rush Limbaugh keeping AM radio alive and actually giving it a birth in a way, in a broadly secular way. But Dr. Dobson had already laid that foundation in so many ways on Christian stations around the country. He was a hugely impactful radio broadcaster. And because that whole thing is the reason you ended up at Focus on the Family in a way, but how much went into I know I saw it too, but how much went into the production of these broadcasts that actually made them such excellent. They were always filled with excellence, clear thinking and teaching, the right guests, everything. Talk a little bit, just very broadly, about why you think that broadcast was so impactful for decades.
Doc was, I wouldn't say he was a perfectionist, but he demanded excellence. He demanded excellence from himself, and he demanded excellence from the team around him. And so things were set up in such a way that we were able to identify good talent and bring them in. Like for the production side, we had an edit test. And there were some complex edits in that edit test. And at first there was a rough edit test, a short little 5-minute, maybe 6-minute close that Mike Trout did, where there were some pretty tough edits in there. And then there was a full broadcast that we had to time edit down to, I forget what it was, 28 minutes, 25 minutes, whatever it was. And so you had to be able to competently do the rough editing, and then you had to, we wanted to find out how well you'd be able to identify the weaker content. So that way what you had when you boiled it down, because in radio, unlike podcasting, you have to hit this time of 28:30. That was the time, the length of the broadcast. And so it was a way in which we could identify, okay, yeah, this guy's got chops and this one doesn't. Likewise, the same way with the producers, they had writing tests and they had research tests, and they were able to identify that kind of talent. And it was massive, I think, in really being able to identify the gems of the applicants. So that way we'd be able to then just take and elevate their talent skills even more. I don't want to toot my own horn, but my bosses told me when they hired me out of Dub Bay, is what it was called, in satellite operations. That was where I first started, just to get my foot in the door. Mm-hmm. They told me that was the best edit test they had ever heard. And I was like, cool, awesome, great. I mean, I was one that I went to school for sports medicine. And when I didn't get in, I was crushed. So I took about a year off of college just to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. And then I remembered when I was in 6th grade, my uncle got us a Fisher-Price cassette recorder, and I made radio shows with my friends. And when I was also in 6th grade, I hosted a kids' news segment at a local radio station. And then when I was a senior in high school, I put together this radio spot for the morning announcements, and one of my classmates who I knew since the 1st grade looked at me and she said, "Steve, I've never seen you smile like this before." And I remembered that, and I was like, oh yeah, radio, audio production, post-production, studio work. That'd be super fun. And that's what I ended up doing. And it was fortuitous the way in which I came out here. I came out here for a girl and a job, mainly the girl. But 6 weeks after I moved here, she met another guy at school and dumped me. But it was the best thing that ever could have happened to me, because I came out here with no friends, no support structure after she dumped me, because I'm not going to hang around my ex-girlfriend's parents' house all the time. And so it was these godly men and women that mentored me and discipled me and really helped shepherd me. And listening to that broadcast for those 15 years, all of his broadcasts, the way in which I did, I feel like I got an honorary PhD just listening to all these broadcasts on family and marriage. So the way in which Focus set things up really set the stage for excellence. Mm-hmm. And it shows, because in 2008, we were the first quote unquote religious broadcast ever inducted into the Radio Hall of Fame.
Yeah. We
beat out Bob Costas. We beat out Dr. Laura, and we beat out the quote unquote king of radio, Howard Stern. So, that is the kind of excellence that we did. And we didn't just do it with the daily broadcast, Radio Theater and Adventures in Odyssey. unbelievably excellent.
And and I just on that point, and I want to talk a little bit about some of more about the background work that went into that broadcast. But you talk about some of the best children's programming of all time, Adventures in Odyssey, is amongst other children's programming they did there. But Adventures in Odyssey was kind of the central door into children's programming that really put forth excellent biblical messages in a non-preachy way while really preaching hard, if you really think about it. Yeah. But enjoyable. My boys growing up, they couldn't get enough of it. Like if you wanted to sit them down and be quiet, just playing Adventures in Odyssey. And I'm saying that, and there are parents all over the country that are listening to this who are saying, heck yeah, I did that all the time. And it's much better than some of these kind of namby-pamby, shallow children's program that was going on at the time. But by the way, it's interesting. We're in a time where children's programming isn't as big a deal as it was in the 90s and early 2000s. Many TV broadcasts, a few radio things, but this thing was on the radio, and it was like it just opened up children's imagination. My favorite theologian is R.C. Sproul. R.C. Sproul always peppered into a lot of his stuff this idea that he was sitting as a young boy in the period during World War II and shortly thereafter, listening to the radio and these broadcasts that really went to the imagination, and you could just picture it in your mind. And he would talk about that every once in a while. Adventures in Odyssey did that as well or better than any of the stuff that was happening in the heyday of radio in the early part of the 20th century. It's some of the most excellent stuff.
And really it came out of Doc's remembering of radio in the 40s, and just how it painted it just helped paint imaginations and those kinds of things. And Adventures in Odyssey, radio theater were excellent. In fact, I don't know if you knew this because you came on in the early 2000s. In 98, shortly after I had started, radio theater won a freaking Peabody Award for its Bonhoeffer series.
I did hear that. Yeah, I did know that.
And it was like, and when it happened, I was like, I clearly hitched my trailer up with the right organization within the Christian sphere, because I mean, they just won a freaking Peabody that would set the bar for this is really excellent. For those that don't know, a Peabody is basically the Pulitzer Prize for radio and television. I mean, there's nothing bigger than a Peabody Award.
When you talk about going back to the Focus on the Family broadcast, which FYI, just so people understand, Dr. Dobson owned the Focus on the Family broadcast. Like that was his deal. And it generated revenue for Focus on the Family, the organization. So never forget that, because Dr. Dobson gave so much away to that organization.
He was a volunteer. He never took a salary.
No, he never took a salary, didn't get paid. He made money off his books, but he would write books. That was his whole income. And every book he put out sold millions, literally. I mean, it's just amazing the impact that his books had on people. But he would take some books and he would donate all the proceeds to the ministry too. So
I think Love Must Be Tough was one of them. I think it was the first one that he did.
Well, Dare to Discipline was always dedicated to the organization as well too. It's just, but like bringing up Boys and some of these other books that he wrote, what a woman hoped her husband knew about her. I mean, those books, that would be his income. His office space, which you and I have both been in many, many times, he paid for that office space. He paid for his own administrative staff that were directly responsible to him. And it allowed him also, if he wanted to endorse a candidate, which, by the way, I made a nascent run for Congress, and he did endorse me for Congress. It was a real honor, because there's only 2 or 3 dozen people ever that he's done that with. But if he would do anything truly political, he could do it from there, because he paid for all that. Like he had the highest level of integrity in ministry organizations that I've personally ever seen, and I've seen a lot. And I lived and breathed it because we doing the 501c4 work, which allowed us to do a bit more political stuff, all the rigors that we went through to make sure that everything was done on the up and up. I saw how that worked and the integrity that went into it from his perspective and trying to make sure that things did well. And of course, Tom Minery played a key role in that as well, too, also since passed away and a great friend. But, he was the integrity level was incredibly high. They were not going to draw a line. They were willing to push things enough to get enough done, but they were never going to draw the line where integrity went away. And I saw 2 IRS audits come up against Dr. Dobson during the Obama years, and I'm certain that they were politically targeted IRS audits, and they came through clean every single time. This was a man of great character and integrity, and it showed up through the entire organization through his leadership. But back to the broadcast. So real quick, the other thing in the background of the broadcast was you had the people in the public policy department doing background work for him on public policy issues. The 2 key characters, friends of mine, and I don't know, I think you knew them fairly well too, are Carrie Gordon Earl.
I loved Carrie. She's a special human.
She's awesome. One of the most wonderful women I've ever known.
Yeah.
Not as wonderful as my wife, by the way, I have to say. Sorry, Carrie, if you're listening to this, but you're great. We think you're awesome. But Carrie Gordon Earl, and then Bruce Houskin, she headed up the public policy. So broadly, she kept up on family policy and ran a team that was just experts and excellent in everything they did. But then Bruce Houskin, which is one of the best legal minds that I've known and a dear friend. And you had these kinds of people of deep skill attracted to work with Dr. Dobson, because even though Dr. Dobson is one of the most brilliant minds that there is, he gets lampooned a lot by the left and by Democrats and so forth. And they're the fools. They look like the idiots because Dr. Dobson was one of the most brilliant men that I've ever known. The man had a deep skill in research and understanding what's going on and retaining information and bringing it back out. He never pushed the envelope in a way that was that I would say was lacked integrity. He didn't get everything right. He'd make a mistake here and there. He'd correct it if it was a real mistake. I mean, but he had a team behind him that I worked with really closely that served him very, very well. And it added to the excellence of that broadcast. It's one of the greatest radio programs in American history, hands down.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember often we wouldn't do those political shows very often. In fact, I remember looking back and it was less than 10% of what we did.
Yeah.
But when we would do it, there was a team, you were among them, that would come down to the studio of you, Carrie, Bruce, someone from accounting was coming down just to make sure everything was okay. This is the amount of money that, the C4 needs to put into the show to pay for it to be on the air, those kinds of things. And
I mean, we literally did calculations to make sure that it didn't go beyond the barriers. Absolutely.
I can't tell you the number of times I was getting ready, wrapping up, getting ready to leave. And I get that call at 4:30 in the afternoon. Doc wants to change tomorrow's broadcast. Something big is going on in California or DC or, Montana or some state, New York, some state they were attacking homeschooling rights, or they were attacking this, or it was bad for this.
Yeah.
And I mean, I personally thrived in those kind of high pressure environments where we were finally done recording around 6:30, and I got 2 hours, less than 2 hours, to get this broadcast edited and time edited down in a way that it can hit stations. And I only missed one 8:30 p.m. release time ever during the times that I was editing. I usually got it in time.
And I'll bet that was totally because of the changes that were made, and everyone knew it was likely to happen, but we still had to try type thing.
And it often came down to Doc's schedule, where he was calling these state senators or U.S. senators and representatives or their staff and getting the details from them to try and figure out how he was going to talk about this and writing his notes, because the guy was so meticulous when it came. He came prepared for every single broadcast. He was so meticulous. He got a great deal of notes from the producers when they were getting ready for these broadcasts, and he would pour through them, add his own thoughts and notes and those kinds of things. And the guy was just meticulous when it came to his radio show, and he understood as he was recording. He had a little like a button pad where he would push a button. It was a little almost a chat where he would hit these keys on the keyboard, and he would cut this out, and this is kind of weak, and he was often doing the calculations with the clock running, figuring out, okay, I've got about 3 minutes I need to add to this because I want to take this part out. And
as someone who was on the radio for 4 years with the daily broadcast myself in Denver, on KLZ in Denver, I always marveled at his skill as a radio broadcaster. Like it wasn't just all the preparation, all that. He really did know how, and of course I was doing it live, and there is a difference that the broadcast was, I don't think, ever done live, but still he treated it like live. He knew how important it was that it flow well. And there was the ability to make edits as needed, and that was great. But I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't recall that it had to be. I mean, you had a lot of edits that you were working on at the end, but he wasn't cutting out a lot of stuff there. The preparation was typically so good. It was just, let's tweak this end. That's a rough edge. Let's smooth that out type stuff, and never substantively having to constantly do a bunch of takes, so to speak, to figure it all out.
And there were a handful of times where we would finish one of these shows and he'd be like, I don't feel like we hit it. And they'd record the entire thing over again, and every single time it was better.
Yeah,
every single time it was significantly better. And I having worked for him long enough, I knew, okay, I know when he says that, my editing is going to be a heck of a lot easier, because what we're going to do that second time, yeah, it's going to take another 30 plus minutes for them to record it, and it's going to take out of my editing time, but I know the end product is going to be that much easier to put together.
I remember there were 3 times that I was the one who caused you to have to suddenly roll up something. I had the privilege of being on the broadcast 3 different times, mostly during the marriage amendment effort in Colorado in 2006, because Dr. Dobson, of course, it was our home state for the organization, and it was really important. It was an interesting situation, because what Tom Menery and Dr. Dobson tasked me to do was to head up the effort to do 2 different things at the same time, and pretend like the right hand, or no, to actually be like with the right hand, not knowing what the left hand's doing, to represent Focus on the Family, but then also to head up the coalition effort, because we had 5 different groups that were working together. They had their interests, which would always, when you put these things together, even though everyone agreed on marriage, we had the Catholic Conference, we had National Association for Evangelicals, and a couple other organizations. They all wanted the same thing, but they've all got their own interests. So that's herding cats while also being faithful to Focus on the Family and to represent what we needed. For me, it was the most challenging year and a half of my life. We started it in 2015 and all the way to November of 2005, all the way to November of 2006. And I have to tell you, it was the most amazing experience of my life. But we had that broadcast a couple different times to make people aware of what was going on, to ask for their help and prayers. And there's nothing more intimidating. And I always felt that I'm a good communicator, and I never had a problem on the radio. I felt like I was really good at it. Nothing more intimidating than sitting in, or potentially intimidating than sitting in the broadcast booth with Dr. Dobson doing this program, knowing what his standard of excellence was. Like, you just didn't go off and do your own thing. He was not an impatient man, but he did not suffer fools well. And you needed to be on your game and ready to go. And he was very gracious to me in that regard. But I tell you what, that was like, you're at the top. This is rock star status that you're doing in terms of skill and capability. So I don't remember if you were in any of those broadcasts or not.
Some of them, yeah. 2006 was about when I started to spend more time engineering in the main broadcast, and so You mentioned herding cats. I've got some 7-week-old kittens running around my feet. And so
for those who are on the podcast portion, got little kittens going up there on the video with Steve. That's so cute.
Yeah.
So let's then shift gears a little bit. Tell me, give me a synopsis of your, you've given some synopsis of your experience at Focus, but kind of give your synopsis of what you think Dr. Dobson was. I want to say this, that my time working at Focus on the Family was a combination of the most intense work period of my life, while at the same time, one of the most fun experiences I ever had. There were so many times we were under the gun for something to get done, to make it happen. I mean, and FYI, you and I, for different reasons, were in the areas where that under the gun thing mattered most. Most people at Focus, it was 9 to 5. We're doing the same thing every day. Let's just make sure we perform everything we're doing. There would be times that folks would get under the gun, but when you're doing the public policy end or you're doing the radio end, man, it gets tense and the pressure gets on. You got to finish things that are up. It was the most thrilling experience of my life. I would never trade it in the world. And the chance to work for Dr. Dobson was exhilarating for me. And it really, I had brought a lot to the table, I think, by the time in 2005. I'd already been working in politics almost 20 years by that point. Almost 20 years. But it really helped me ramp it up more.
Yeah, absolutely. I started in 97. August of 97 is when I got out here. In fact, it was 28 years ago on Friday, actually.
Wow.
Friday is when it was the day after Dr. Dobson passed, was my 28th year of being a resident of the state of Colorado. And it was electric. It was growing. We were hiring people hand over fist. And the parking lot was packed on a chapel day. If you didn't get there early, if you got there late, you were parking in the back of the parking lot. I mean, it was something where I remember in 2002 for the 25th anniversary, we did a big celebration and people were coming from all over the nation. And we did just these really cool things and had tents set up on the campus. And it was so electric. What was going on there at the campus. And one of the amazing things so I just worked my way up through the ranks. I started as, working in satellite operations in Dub Bay. And then I was hired as the international editor. Then I worked as a daily editor. Then I worked over on Weekend Magazine. And then I transitioned into running the daily production team and being the chief audio engineer. And in that role, I had a very unique level of connection with Dr. Dobson in a way that very, 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 very few employees did.
And by the way, I mean, I felt, decently close to him. What you experience is much deeper than anyone. It's you and John Fuller maybe are.
Yes. Me and John Fuller, the co-host. Prior to that, Mike Trout.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever Doc didn't get enough stuff recorded in December for January, because he took the most of the month of January and he spent it at his modest 2-bedroom condo in Palm Desert to get out of the Colorado cold. As someone who grew up in Texas, Louisiana, South Texas, spent a fat chunk of his adult life in Southern California, the cold he wasn't a gigantic fan of. He accepted it. Colorado, if you got to live somewhere where there's snow, Colorado cannot be beat because there's so low humidity. 300 plus days of sunshine every year. The sun warms you right up. It's glorious.
Yeah.
But he would take January and he would go to Palm Desert. And when we didn't get enough stuff done in Colorado Springs, we'd go out to Palm Desert and record. I'd bring a mobile setup. We had these sound absorption panels that we would set up in his office and we would sit around a table. And because we were recording professional audio, we could not have the air conditioning clicking on and off like I just heard click off at your place just now as I'm talking. So we would crank down the AC, turn it off, and we'd be sitting around in shorts and T-shirts, and Shirley would make us the best freaking lemonade in the entire world. Then we'd break for lunch, turn the AC back on, all go out to lunch together, and then come back in the afternoon, record wrap up for the day, and we'd almost always go out to dinner together. And it was those conversations that I remember that were just so much fun, because just conversations about everything and anything, where he would ask about, John's life and my life and what's going on. And I've got young kids now at this point, and he'd be asking me about how they were developing and what's the fun stuff. What are my challenges? And my marriage, he would ask about how that was going. My absolute favorite, I've got a ton of Dobson stories, but my absolute favorite one that I love to tell is we had wrapped up in Palm Desert, and we went out to, Doc and Shirley wanted to take us to their favorite Mexican restaurant there in Palm Springs. And we went out to dinner, and afterwards he wanted to take us to his favorite frozen yogurt place. And so we're getting up, we're walking out. They see a friends that they wanted to go say hi to. And so they go say hi. John Fuller and I are walking out to the car. I peel off to the restroom. John walks out to our rental car. And when I come out, Doc and Shirley are about 6 to 10 feet in front of me, and they're holding hands. Here's a couple that have been married almost 50 years at this point, and I saw the way in which they loved each other. I saw the way in which that they adored each other. I mean, the two of them had a marriage that was one for the ages, I believe. I mean, they adored each other in a way. I remember at one point, I was in Doc's office when I was at Family Talk, which I left with Doc to go help start Family Talk. I was actually the second employee he hired after his assistant, Becky Lane. And that first weekend, actually, it was within a week, I believe, of him being ushered off to pasture by the Focus leadership. And so he called, offered me a position. I was the second one that he hired, and we built Family Talk from scratch. But I saw the way in which he loved Shirley, and I saw the way in which he was with the microphone off outside of the studio. Is exactly the same person who he was when the microphones were turned on.
So true.
Who people heard behind the microphone, he was everything that he was, all that and more as a human being.
It cannot be emphasized enough. Like, you knew that there were some personal aspects of him that no one would approach unless you were close to him, but you knew the character of the man. He did not change in the least.
I remember us having a conversation, going back to what I started saying, at Family Talk in his office. And he told me, Steve, I don't struggle with the things that most men in my positions, most leaders in my position struggle with. I don't struggle with women. I saw the way in which he adored Shirley, and it was the truth. I mean, he protected his marriage. He said, I don't struggle with money. I mean, he had more than enough money to never work again the rest of his life, but he'd worked, he volunteered
the entire time. Yeah.
And in fact, I remember him saying, he was really careful, even though he was a volunteer, for appearance purposes. He did not want to have the ostentatious cars. He did not want to have ostentatious dress. He did not want to give any hint of he was pulling money, give anyone any reason to question, anyone question giving a donation and thinking it was lining his pockets.
Right.
But he did tell me, he said, Steve, I do struggle with pride. And, and any man who's in that kind of position, I get it. I get it. And fortunately, he had the wherewithal and the sense to know this is where I struggle. And he had people around him like Chuck Colson, who was willing to call, who was a dear, dear, dear friend. I'd say probably one of Doc's closest friends.
Yep.
Who,
without a doubt,
within that Christian leadership circle, who had that ability to challenge Doc and say, you're going off the rails a little bit on this one. I really feel, and try and rein him back in. And so, And
that was critical for him. Listen, and it took a guy like Chuck Colson to be able to do it. Like, they were of equal stature.
Yeah, because Chuck worked for Nixon.
Yep.
He chief counsel, if I remember right, for Nixon, and Doc, with the work that he had done with the Reagan administration on the Pornography Council and speaking into President Reagan's policy around the family. Yep. He had President Reagan's ear in a way, almost as like Chuck Colson did. And so that experience within the White House and that level of power, the two of them really fed off each other and it was so good. I remember being in Nashville and Chuck happened to be in Nashville at the same time. And so we recorded a broadcast, and afterwards we all went out to lunch, and Doc and Chuck peeled off because they wanted a private conversation. And so we peeled off and hung out with Chuck's team. And it was cool to see the way in which they would just banter back and forth from across the room, and before and after. It was a very, very special friendship, and a loss that really hit Doc hard when Chuck passed.
It was, and he represents what has been a growing loss of really key leaders in the church. Like it's Dr. Dobson was a significantly important fixture in what has happened in the church as a wonderful leader and someone who, I mean, listen, I don't know what we're going to do after all this. It's really significant in my mind. Hopefully,
I see other leaders starting to step up. Is anyone going to match that kind of platform that Dr. Dobson had? I often joked with my friends, he was the evangelical Pope.
Yeah,
there was nobody bigger. I mean, Jerry Falwell was a massive, leader, and so was Billy Graham on just the non-political side. But both of them were kind of winding down their careers in the 90s when Dr. Dobson really blew up and really took that mantle and became the voice, the biggest name in evangelicalism, especially conservative evangelicalism.
Yeah, I agree. Let's talk about just him and culture. And I don't want to get into that because there was the controversy. There were various things that people talked about with him. I was recently, and I shared this with you. In fact, actually, I should probably play a little bit of it. But I was recently responding to, in one of my media appearances, to it was the Holy Post podcast, Phil Vischer and Skye Jitani, bringing up the fact that Dr. Dobson wrote a letter in 2012 or in 2008 after Obama was elected saying, listen, now that that's happened, here are the consequences. And he listed out, I don't know, a few dozen things. And it's surreal how, like, he didn't always get the 2012 right, but he got the thing right. As we've come from 2008 to 2025, some of the things that he said would be set into motion if Barack Obama were elected. There was a implication, though, by this group. First of all, they poo-pooed the letter, but secondly, an implication that when he said in his broadcast shortly thereafter that America is not going to look like us anymore, they made some implication that this had racist undertones.
God, no. Oh yeah. No.
It's horrible. This man was nothing like that. In fact, I said in my response, or as I was responding to it, I said, well, yeah, go ask Alveda King about that, who was a dear friend of Dr. Dobson's, Martin Luther King's niece. No, there's nothing like that at all.
No, not at all. Not at all. In fact, I was his chief audio engineer leading into that 2008 election, and I was engineering all of those sessions and hearing what he was saying when the microphone was turned off. And it had everything to do with Barack Obama's policy stances.
Yeah.
And his history. I remember the biggest thing that struck me was State Senator Barack Obama did a big speech in favor of partial birth abortion.
Yep.
He went to the mat for abortion to be legal up until birth. And in some ways, partial birth abortion is really after birth because of the way in which it's done. Because 3/4 of that baby is out.
Yeah.
It's the head that's still in. And the way in which it happens is disgusting and gross. And my late wife, Elizabeth, who you knew, both of her pregnancies, pregnancy-induced hypertension, high-risk pregnancies, bed rest, everything. I remember the day we found out she was pregnant with Matthew, our very first pregnancy. She was diagnosed with a type of lupus that the doctor said, this is going to be very dangerous for you. I recommend an abortion. She was like, nope. She found another rheumatologist. And sure enough, it played out to where it was an emergency C-section. The doctor came to me afterwards. She lost a lot of blood. she almost died. And it shook me. But never once did they say in that third trimester, we need to do an abortion. Instead, it was, he's viable enough, we're going to do an emergency C-section. And I've heard from so many OBGYNs that have said this, that there is no medical reason whatsoever in third trimester, because when that quote unquote fetus transitions into that third trimester, the viability jumps to 80% that first week. Yeah. And so there's no medical reason, these OBGYNs have said, for this. And so I remember when Barack Obama was going to the mat for partial birth abortion, that for me was the scariest thing that I saw. Everything that Dr. Dobson opposed policy-wise with Barack Obama had to do with his policy issues, not his race. Never once did I hear Dr. Dobson bring up a question of his citizenship. Was he actually born in the U.S., which was a thing being talked about back then? Never once. It was all policy.
And in things unrelated to policy, just in personal life, just the opposite of those accusations. It's absolutely crazy. But what it did show, just the opposite of what they were claiming in that podcast, he was very prescient about what was happening in American culture, beginning all the way back to opposing Dr. Spock and the way that bringing up children was changing radically through the 60s and into the 70s. I'm going to go through a few of these things that he said might happen. And again, Barack Obama had been elected. He wrote this in 2008. He wrote this letter, and he titled it A Letter from 2012, looking ahead to what the effects of a Barack Obama administration. And what this shows is not so much this interaction related to Barack Obama, which was important and significant, but just his understanding of where the culture was going. And a lot of people didn't want to hear what he had to say about it because he was right. And two, they had a different agenda that they want and still want to impose upon this country. But just look at this. One of the first thing he says is that the Boy Scouts, he said, the Boy Scouts no longer exist as an organization. They chose to disband rather than be forced to obey Supreme Court decision that they would have to hire homosexual schoolmasters. Okay. Now, that's not how it happened, but that's very close. It wasn't the Supreme Court that did anything. And the Boy Scouts, in effect, does not exist anymore. They filed Chapter 11 and then they rebranded. They're gone. Here's the next thing. Elementary schools now include compulsory training in varieties of gender identity in grade 1, including the goodness of homosexuality as one possible personal choice. Okay, now remember in 2008, there were some moves towards this, but it wasn't widespread. That very thing is widespread right now in many, many school districts. He saw that coming. Adoption agencies would have to that are Christian adoption agencies would either have to accept placing children with homosexual couples or not be able to do it. Okay, that hasn't entirely happened, but the threat against Catholic Charities and against other adoption agencies has been great. And then there was some Supreme Court decisions that actually helped support that, but that was coming down the road. All businesses that have government contracts at the national, state, or local level now have to provide documentation of equal benefits for same-sex couples. That actually happened in both the Obama and Biden administrations. Public broadcasting. The Bible can no longer be freely preached over radio or television stations when the subject matter includes such offensive doctrines as criticizing homosexual behavior. Okay, that hasn't quite happened, but we understand that the censorship industrial complex was completely put into place during the Biden administration. If you want to jump in. Yeah.
I think with that one specifically, I don't think Doc really understood how entrenched the First Amendment is at not only legislative level, but also the judicial level, because it's something that he saw. Here's where it came from. He saw what was happening in Europe with pastors talking about homosexuality being jailed.
Yep.
He saw that. but I don't think he really understood just how critically important our founding fathers were in establishing the First Amendment and having 200 plus years, almost 250 years now, of judicial precedent protecting that right. But
look how it's playing out in 2025.
Yeah, but I think the whole censorship complex, and also the doxing and just the pushback, the organized really pushback from all these leaders using the same talking points to try and shut someone down who is speaking against, whatever, speaking their beliefs and someone else disagrees with. At that time in 2008, social media really wasn't much of a thing. Facebook had at that point taken and gone and opened up and started to become more of a thing, but it wasn't nearly what it is now in terms of all the different platforms. And
and think about this too. So one, this is playing out with Europe getting much worse now in 2025 than it was beginning to get then. But two, you're all right. The First Amendment has been a stronghold for our liberties remaining. But you had to have clandestine efforts through government agencies to try to twist the implementation of the elimination of the First Amendment. And so the effort was there. We always knew.
Yeah.
And by the way, we have seen efforts like in California in particular to try to ban Bible studies in a sense, or at least, they wanted to police Bible studies in people's homes. It's really crazy. And I could go on and on. I'm going to do a few things here, but I'm going to play a couple of videos, but I want to look at some of these. Oh man, no, listen, I've got 19, 20, 21. Oh my gosh. He's got 27 different things, and we'll share this in the notes so people can look at it. But, I see healthcare changes that Obamacare brought about, by the way. He called for it. He called for attacks on homeschooling, and Illinois recently almost eliminated homeschooling through legislation it wanted to pass that just barely did not pass because of homeschooler pressure. Gun ownership changes. We've seen constant attacks on gun ownership. Again, another Bill of Rights thing that has helped us protect that right. The founders knew what they were doing. On and on and on and on. I could talk about this all day long, and I'm not going to. But he predicted, and the total number on here was, there were a total of 34 things, and I calculated that only about 10% of these didn't happen, at least to some degree.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But see, the reason is he was an intelligent man who sought the Lord's wisdom for things and was able to understand and see what was coming down the pike. Yes. You were looking up something. What were you going to say?
Well, I was just texting you to make sure to send me a link to that letter, so that way we can my team can ensure to include that in the show notes.
And we didn't announce this, but I do have Steve's team do these podcasts for us, and it helps us get this done. There, you got it.
Beautiful.
So, but I want to play a couple of videos here. So let's fast forward from 2008 to 2015, the Obergefell decision in the Supreme Court, which made homosexual marriage a claim that was a right within the Constitution. I'm going to pull this up. And let me play this real quick here.
More than 5,000 years ago, in Genesis 2:24, we're told that the Creator gave Adam and Eve his prescription for the first family. It's written, "For this cause a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the two shall be one flesh." That was the divine plan, and it has essentially prevailed wherever mankind has taken root from that time to this. Now, however, 5 imperious lawyers, known as justices, have a better idea. Instead of marriage consisting exclusively of a man and a woman, they expanded the definition in the Constitution to include same-sex unions. And that's only the beginning. Already there is speculation about other permutations being added, including polygamy and what is known as polyamorous relationships, and that means many loves. Even though
hold on. Let me pull back off of that. So, what's interesting here is that, I remember in the debates we were having in the early part of the 20th century, when people would talk about permutations of marriage coming along, people thought you were weird.
Yeah, I thought it crazy. Yeah.
But he's right. He was right. That was in 2015 that was starting. The ramp up is bigger.
Yeah,
since.
real funny, quick, super aside. I've heard at the very beginning a stomach gurgle. I don't think that was you. I think that was Dr. Dobson. Am I right?
Might have been. Yeah, I don't think it was me.
As a sound engineer, Dr. Dobson's stomach gurgles. He did. It was humor within the organization. Stomach gurgle. There it is.
By the way, and in my previous experience, I'm a sound man at heart. Yeah. And I produced most of my radio show for 4 years every day. And hear my background noise. It's kind of crazy. Sorry about that.
It's all good. But yeah, that's the stomach gurgle. I just laughed.
I just laughed.
Oh yeah, that was Dr. Dobson.
I heard that, and I'm glad you pointed it out. So here's something else he said. Let me pull this up, because he talked about concerns with law. Let me pull this up here.
I grieve most for what it will do to our children, our grandchildren, and future generations. They will be taught that right is wrong and that wrong is right, and that the teachings of Scripture are unreliable and inaccurate. How outrageous it is to me that boys and girls barely out of babyhood are already being introduced in some schools and some states to perverse adult behavior. Soon, public school textbooks throughout the country will be rewritten and re-illustrated to conform to this ruling. It matters not that these revisions will contradict the beliefs and the convictions of their parents. It's already become the law of the land.
So, So think about this for a second. I just want to put some perspective. That's 2015, right after the decision. Everything he described was not endemic in society. And here we are, and it was only 5-7 years later that you have explicit trans books and even book reading in libraries, explicit trans book reading. When he talks about explicit adult behavior being modeled before children, notice he wasn't saying we need to pass laws to stop illicit adult behavior. That wasn't the point. The point was the children. What are going to happen to kids in schools? And that has gotten radicalized since then. People laughed this off as the hysterical rantings of some right-wing nut job who doesn't, who's always saying how bad it's going to be. And what he had it right down. He had it perfectly down. I mean, I remember it's amazing
him mentioning polyamorous relationships. And in my dating experience, since my wife passed, it started very little. And the last time I was on the dating apps, it was crazy the number of women that I would see. I'm in an open marriage. I'm in a polyamorous relationship. I'm this and that. And they were swiping right on me. And I was like, I don't no. I'm not going to get involved in that. I'm not going to. No.
It's a cultural phenomenon. I mean, it really is. And by the way, this is not broadly based in all of society and everyone engaging with it every day. It's just growing as a part of it. And it's really crazy. Here's one other thing. He talks about religious liberty in this.
Since same-sex marriage has now been determined to be a universal human right by the highest court in the land, it will trump religious liberty and affect churches, seminaries, ministries, Christian schools, businesses, hospitals, charities, and many other institutions. The tax-exempt status of each of these entities is at serious risk. Above all else, I fear that God's judgment will befall this once great nation.
The thing that really bothers me as I look at all that's been happening in this country is especially that last statement. today I'm flipping through. I always make it a habit in the mornings after I've just spent time staying away from media, but as I'm getting ready for the day, I mean, it's the job I do. I need to keep up with everything that's going on. I'm flipping through X and I'm looking at the disaster around this country, particularly in major cities, as we're right at the recording of this in the middle of the debate of Donald Trump using actually what is his authority to go into DC and fix the crime problem there, because the federal district is under congressional authority and there are emergency powers that he's undertaking, and crime is going away. And you still have all these other Democrat mayors that are determined to allow, through neglect, crime to propagate in their cities. When I'm looking at the legal assault that just took place during Donald Trump's election to try to take him down with fake lawsuits, literal designed lawfare to take out a political opponent. Now that we know that Barack Obama, in the months leading up to Donald Trump taking office, both the election in 2016 and the interim between when he took the oath of office, was designing a methodology to take Donald Trump down as an American president, and on and on and on. I look at the behavior in the culture. Dr. Dobson pointed out constantly that the family is the foundation of society. He's absolutely right about that. John Locke, in his two treatises of government, which highly influenced our founding, he made the point that all government starts in the family, and that when governments are created, that family structure cedes part of its liberty for that government to take care of things that family can't take care of all by itself. That's what's at risk constantly as we're working through these things. Dr. Dobson saw how critical the family structure was for society, and you had these radical leftist politicians that always ignored it.
Yeah.
He was. I want to play one last thing and riff off this, because the other aspect of all that that we're looking at, there was a time, and you alluded to it earlier, when he was literally kicked out of Focus on the Family. I've had discussions about this. I remember sitting around thinking, what's going to happen to the broadcast? Like, I don't think
I wouldn't describe it as being kicked out. I would describe it as because a transition place had been set up, but no timeline, no structure had been associated with that. And so I don't remember the year exactly, but I think it was like 2010, maybe, that he stepped down as the president, handed the reins over to Don Hodel. Don Hodel,
they had Jim Daly come in thereafter.
They had identified Jim Daly as an internal person who could step into that CEO role. And so Doc was still on as the chairman. And then after 2009, Dr. Dobson stepped down as the chairman. And so he was just a figurehead. And I will say this, the way in which they transitioned him out was not honoring. It wasn't. As someone who was very close to Dr. Dobson, and I heard Dr. Dobson's side of the story, and I heard the side of the story that was told to all the employees. I never spoke specifically to Jim about what was going on. Mistakes were made on both sides in that transition.
You're right. There wasn't as firm a timeline that was there. He was still chairman at the time, by the way, but there wasn't as firm a timeline shift. They're all put together. But as you can tell, he was 15 years doing family, or not 15 years, 10 years doing Family Talk. There was still a lot in there. It was precipitous. And I'm going to play a video thing here, and you'll see what he said publicly about it. I've had private discussions, and it was, in my opinion, unnecessary. I remember sitting back saying, and the Focus on the Family broadcast still does fairly well. But I mean, at the time that this happened, you're talking about well over $100 million of revenue, still had, well over 1,000 employees. I think it had gone down just a little bit prior, but not much. And right now, I mean, they've sold off half the property. As you know, they maybe have, I don't even know what
they're getting revenue. They're getting revenue off the property, which I think is really smart. And they're using that revenue to pay for utilities, electricity, water, all that stuff.
Maybe 200-300 employees. It's not an insubstantial ministry. And I don't dislike Jim Daly, but he hated the politics. Let's just be honest. He hated the politics of it. I mean, he's going to hear me say this publicly, and I'll be interested to see the reaction. But that's what it was. But I want to play this video that CBN did recently, right after his passing, that I thought was really good and kind of gives a synopsis, but it addresses that particular issue. So we'll kind of start closing down on this. But
after more than 30 years at Focus on the Family, Dobson left in 2009.
There were philosophical differences, and
by the way, real quick, Steve, that view.
It was awesome. It was incredible.
I real quick before they go on with this, I got to share when I first came in 2005 to interview, and I had never been to Colorado Springs in my life. I drove up, and where Doc is standing there in the window, just down below him is the parking lot. And I pulled up into that parking lot, Steve. And you know
this video is actually his Family Talk office, not his Focus
is
office.
That the Family Talk
That's
office?
the Family Talk office.
Gotcha. Sorry.
So
well,
just down the road.
His office at Focus.
So same view. Same view.
Same view. Which looked down. So I remember pulling up on that parking lot, getting out of the car. And of course, when you pull in the parking lot, Pikes Peak is behind you, so you're not seeing anything. I stepped out of that car. I turned around, and now you get used to it after you've been there for a while, but there's Pikes Peak looming over you.
Yes.
It was the most amazing feeling that I had. I remember that. I'll never forget that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so this is kind of insider stuff. Let me play it on here. I'll start it over. Sorry, guys.
After more than 30 years at Focus on the Family, Dobson left in 2009.
There were philosophical differences, and it was obvious that I saw things a little differently than the person who was my successor.
He began a new nationally syndicated show called Family Talk.
You cannot have a strong country without strong families. That's the next generation.
Dobson also brought his family message to the 700 Club many times.
Pat, all of those traditional views are under attack today. And everything that we have believed about the family for thousands of years, literally, is being questioned now and being undermined. And there is a real danger that the family will disintegrate.
Almost every day, things are coming out of Washington that assault righteousness, standards of righteousness, and assault the family.
Dobson also didn't hesitate to wade into culture wars, taking on issues like abortion and gambling.
My heart bleeds for what's happening in my country at this time. Killing 1.5 million unborn children who cannot speak for themselves.
It destroys families. It creates incredible problems with pathological gambling and problem gambling. There's just many people who are addicted to this stuff.
And through it all, he stood firmly with the message that Jesus Christ is the answer.
The most important thing is that this country desperately needs a revival, where people would fall on their knees before God in genuine repentance and forgiveness. When you get it right with Him, you tend to have it right with the people around you.
The Republican Party cannot save us. The Democratic Party cannot save us. There is only one answer, and that answer is Jesus Christ. Do you agree?
Lori Johnson, CBN News.
I consider it one of the great things that I missed out on is looking at those 70s sideburns and not encouraging him to bring them back. Oh, I would have loved just he had such a playful spirit. Oh, I could have given him so much grief on that and just tried to get it. Doc, you got to bring those back. You got to bring the 70s sideburns back.
But you could always make fun of the glasses.
Oh,
we
yeah.
never got rid of those big old honker glasses. That was that one thing he pulled in from the 60s and 70s that he never let go of.
Oh my gosh.
But you really pay attention to what he's saying. First of all, the country does still need a revival. I'm very grateful for the changes happening with Donald Trump as president. I mean, there's some things that, everything's going to be good or bad one way or the other. There are going to be some bad there. We're getting a little bit of a reprieve of all these things that Dr. Dobson was saying are so dangerous for us. I wish I had been able to pull up that picture, but Myra and me were with him at a Trump rally in Colorado Springs in 2020. He had given the invocation, and we were over talking to him for a little bit. And he and Shirley, they were sitting there together. Again, expressions of love. You could tell how much they enjoyed being with one another. But he really did support Donald Trump, knowing that Donald Trump was not a perfect man, knowing that, you're going to get the good and the bad. But the one thing that Donald Trump has done, surprisingly, I mean, when I grew up, like Donald Trump was the most notable playboy that there ever was. But, there's been a real push in both Trump administrations to help protect the family, protect religious liberty, and to put God first in our country again, if at all possible. Again, surprisingly, some people in his first administration were comparing him to David. I never thought that was a very good analogy at all, but it is a great analogy to put him in there with Cyrus or Nebuchadnezzar, men 100%. That the Bible
100%.
says God used
100%.
to help Israel.
Yep.
And I do think God is using Donald Trump. And by the way, all you progressive Christians, your heads are going to explode now. And I don't care what you think. It's the truth, and you're not even willing to admit it. But that it has been helpful, but it's not enough. Just like Dr. Dobson said at the end there, you can't trust in the Republican Party. You can't trust in the Democrat Party. You have to trust in the Lord to really bring this about. And it's my hope and prayer that we can do that as a country. So what are your thoughts on the clip I played beyond that?
That was Doc. That was Doc. He was someone that in 2 presidential elections, I know he didn't like the Republican nominees so much that he voted third party. I'm not sure he ever publicly said that, but I know privately I heard that. In fact, I know publicly he did with Bob Dole. Mm-hmm. He had said that he was not voting for Bob Dole and he was voting third party. And the other one, I'm not sure he did, but he's gone now, so I think I can say this. It was McCain. He could not vote for McCain against Obama. He felt McCain would. I remember distinctly him saying this privately, and I think it's okay to say this because I don't think it's anything that would cause any controversy. But I remember him saying, I would rather fight Barack Obama the next 4 years than vote for McCain and lose the Republican Party. Yeah. Which I thought of as something to admire, someone who had these deep convictions, so much so that this is the way in which he saw it.
Yeah. Listen, McCain was a horrible scourge on the Republican Party, in my opinion. And that's why he was willing also to endorse Donald Trump, because Donald Trump did. Like, I have been making the case that Donald Trump has revived the Reagan legacy. And I think Dr. Dobson saw that as well. I mean, so much of the good that Donald Trump is doing are things that really Reagan didn't have as much of an opportunity to do because he had a Democrat Congress for 6 of the 8 years that he was president, and a half Democrat Republican Congress the first 2 years because he had the Senate. But it was really, I can see that that's the case. I wasn't aware of that, but I can see that being the case. It does not surprise me. Oh, and a quick story, by the way, for me. So in 2008, he had endorsed Mike Huckabee in the primary. And I think that was a good call. I endorsed Mike Huckabee early on in the primary as well. So, and Dr. Dobson had
I distinctly remember the absolute adoration by so many focus staff members to Mike Huckabee. I jokingly referred to them as the Huckabites. You got back in the Bible, you got the Amalekites, you got the Jebusites, you got all these ites that are a part of ancient Israel. I called them the Huckabites, and I so wish I would have had Mike Huckabee's team's ear to be able to say, you guys got to brand this for the evangelicals.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he had Mike come into Colorado. Like, there was no reason for Mike Huckabee to campaign in Colorado. He had him come in to meet the board of Focus on the Family. Now, again, he did this on the Focus campus in the areas that he purchased, like he paid for. Yeah. So it was all on the up and up. But he had him meet the board, and he only wanted 2 other people in that board meeting. One of them was Dave Schulteis, a dear friend of mine and one of Dr. Dobson's closest friends, former state legislator in Colorado. But I got a call from his secretary saying, Dr. Dobson wants you in this meeting, so make sure you come. And I was there too. Nice. So he knew I was running Colorado Family Institute, and he knew that I had endorsed Mike Huckabee publicly. And, that was the one chance in that group of potential Republican candidates. Really, I think Ron Paul tried to run, and I think Doc would have been glad for Ron Paul if he had gotten the nomination. But he went with,
I distinctly remember while we were at Family Talk when Rand Paul first ran for state Senate, Mike McConnell had called Doc and said, you need to endorse this, my candidate for U.S. Senate. And Doc went on the air and supported him, and all of a sudden these Focus Policy Council people were like, no, calling him privately at Family Talk and saying, no, Rand Paul's the guy we want. Rand Paul. And Doc immediately turned around and said, and corrected himself and endorsed Rand. And so Doc really saw Rand and Ron Paul's politics as something good for the country.
He was a limited government guy. I can guarantee you that he would have had, and probably did have, disagreements with both of them, because I wouldn't characterize Doc as libertarian minded, but he was a limited government guy. Yes. And he knew that he knew particularly Ron Paul has a great character as a man, and he admired that in him as well too. So, but anyway, so that was a privilege and an honor. I mean, he wanted me there. He wanted to make sure I was there. And then again, later when I attempted very nascently to try to roll up a congressional campaign at my house in Indiana, which I had to pull back from because a guy came in and threw in millions, and he overwhelmed everybody, and I knew I couldn't do it, but he did endorse me. I was very grateful for that. But so in conclusion, so I think what I want to do here is kind of put a summary for me, for each of us maybe, of Dr. Dobson's life, what was great about him, what our experience with him was, and what we would want people to remember him by. What are your thoughts on that, Steve?
Oh my gosh. For me personally, the guy had such a tremendous influence in my life, and not just during those 15 years that I worked for him at Focus and Family Talk. My mom was a big Dobson supporter growing up. I remember stopping by the post office on my walk home from school and picking up the mail and seeing a Focus on the Family newsletter. And I distinctly remember on the drive to church on Wednesday nights listening to Focus on the Family. And I remember hearing it while Mom was making dinner. And I remember when I was 10 or 11 years old, my mom locked me in her bedroom and gave me Dr. Dobson's Preparing for Adolescence tape series. And Dr. Dobson was the one that taught me the birds and the bees. And I remember distinctly my church's bulletin, there being a denominational insert in there, and in there was a Q&A with Dr. Dobson every time. And my pastor in high school was boring as heck for a teenager. And I remember reading Dr. Dobson's Q&A every single week because I needed something to get me through those sermons. And his impact was so amazing, and amazing on me personally. I mean, I'm going to get emotional on this one, but 2 days after my wife died, I hadn't worked for the guy for 7 years at that point, 8 years. And he and Shirley called me to ask me how I was doing. and offer their condolences. And he was the consummate psychologist. And they prayed for me, and they asked me, where did I see God in all of this? The guy had a heart of gold. There's no one that you agree with 100% politically. There is no one, and there should be no one. If there is someone that you agree 100% politically, you're not thinking for yourself.
Right.
But, oh my gosh, the man was he was someone that had such an impact in the culture because of the way in which I was able to travel with him. And we would break for dinner. I cannot tell you the number of times people would see him or hear his voice. His back would be turned to them, and they would hear his voice and run over to our table and start weeping about the impact that he had on their lives and on their marriage and on their family and on their parenting, and how he made them a better parent, and the teachings and the resources that Focus would give away to help people that needed help but didn't necessarily have the ability to pay for. It's my gosh, oh my God, the man was just an incredible human being who I absolutely adored. And it's sad that so many people that I'm seeing lambasting him and blaming him for the abuse that they suffered. It's tragic that people just have this devil that they want to try and build up and blame for all of their problems, when it was something, his view on corporal punishment is not what these parents were doing to these kids.
Yeah.
It's not.
Quite the opposite, in fact.
Yes. So the man was incredible.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about what my impression was of Dr. Dobson and what it had, the impact it had for me. When I was young Christian, and I was at odds with my family for many years after becoming a Christian. I was a 16-year-old kid. I was telling my parents, because I loved them and I wanted them to become saved, I told them they're going to hell, and you can get saved from this. And
youth mistakes.
Yeah, exactly. The zeal without wisdom, not helping them get perspective. But I mean, not that the message is wrong. It's just that the presentation wasn't always so good. But I was going through that. I was also seeking to try to be pure and walk with God in truth. And I do have sometimes a problems with the purity message in the church, not because I disagree with it. I think it's right, but because they think that if a young kid is just sexually pure, then everything's going to be fine. Oh, no. It's far more than that, much deeper than that. It's building a relationship with God. And as an 18-year-old, I wanted to get married so much and have kids, and I would listen to Dr. Dobson amongst the other people. In fact, I spent a lot of time listening to some great teachers on the radio, certainly Doc and Chuck Swindoll, many others. I could throw them all out. But I learned so much about what I needed to understand to be a husband and a father. And in part because of what Dr. Dobson taught me, in part because of other things and just reading the scripture, I came to this one conclusion, and he exemplified this so well. The number one goal of a married man, is to care for his wife's heart. It's not to meet his needs. It's not even in primarily his career. Now, he needs to be excellent at his career, and Dr. Dobson was. He needs to work hard at his career, build it well. But at the end of the day, the number one goal is to care for your wife's heart. He taught me that by example, by teaching. And then, of course, there were other things I received along the way that helped me with that. But the other thing is, as a guy who in 1992 was sitting in Mike Pence's office at Indiana Policy Review, thinking about wanting to get involved in politics in a full-time way and getting introduced to my first political job, the guy he was meeting afterwards, I ultimately worked for. Throughout my time in politics, I sought constantly to honor the Lord. Remember, I told you having the year and a half doing the marriage amendment stuff was like the most stressful, amazing, wonderful period of my life. But part of the reason it was so wonderful is the Holy Spirit really impressed upon me to memorize Psalm 4. And I'm going to send people back to go read that. But well, actually, I am going to read it because Dr. Dobson exemplified in my mind a guy who sought to please God through his actions. And I want to read Psalm 4 here. Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness. You have this, I have this memorized, but I'm going to make sure I don't mess this up. Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness. You have relieved me in my distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer. O sons of men, how long will my honor become a reproach? How long will you love what is worthless and aim at deception? But know that the Lord has set apart the godly man for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him. Meditate in your heart on your bed and be still. Offer the sacrifices of righteousness and trust in the Lord. Many are saying, who will show us any good? Lift up the light of your countenance upon us, O Lord. You have put gladness in my heart more than when their grain and new wine abound. In peace, I will both lie down and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me to dwell in safety. Now, the Lord gave that to me to memorize and to meditate upon through a year and a half of struggle. That exemplified Dr. Dobson's approach to the Lord and God's honor of him, because he was the subject of a reproach constantly in the media, amongst the left, amongst Democrats, but yet he sought the Lord every single time. And I say that because I want to play this video I saw. Greg Laurie posted this up after Dr. Dobson passed away. He had interviewed Dr. Dobson, and this little snippet, I think it's about a minute and a half long, I think this really exemplifies the heart of Dr. James Dobson.
If you were going to give one last talk, you knew that you could only speak one last time, what would you talk about?
I would talk about the theme of that book, which is winning your children to Christ.
Your legacy, the greatest gift.
I've written 35 books or so, and all of them point toward this one way or the other. That's the capstone of my professional life.
That's where he was at. That's where the man lived and what he tried to do. He saw his life as a ministry. He didn't see himself as a minister in the formal sense of the word. But he knew that he had that responsibility. He knew that if the family could stay strong in America, that America could stay strong, that the principles of our founding could continue, however imperfect one wants to make them out to be. And our Constitution is not the Bible or Scripture, but it is really about the best document that mankind has ever created in organizing a governmental structure, as best man could ever do it. And he knew that those values were very strong. He believed in freedom. But he believed that freedom was impossible without goodness. And he knew that goodness was impossible without a relationship with Christ and a seeking of God in his word. That's his legacy. And I pray in my life always to maintain that type of a legacy in what I'm doing.
And he lived it. He lived that with his family. We talked a lot about his love for Shirley and their love affair and how it's one that's a storybook romance. I saw the way in which he would stop a broadcast when Danae or Ryan called and would take that call. His children were the second most important thing in his life. It was Shirley, then his kids. And he lived that and loved them.
And in a way, the Focus on the Family broadcast and the organization started because his dad called him out for being gone from the family too much. And that's a legacy. And God honored it and made it very successful. And it's not happening now as much, but when Dr. Dobson was on the radio, people listened, and he really did influence a lot of people. He knew how important that was when it came to some truly serious political issues, but he didn't make the show political. But he did stand up. He knew he had a responsibility to stand up for what mattered in society to protect the family. It's not that he sat around all day and said, I want to be involved in politics. And he was pretty heavily involved personally in politics. Politicians called him constantly and were in contact with him. He was engaged. I saw it. But he didn't live and breathe politics. He lived and breathed the family, and he lived and breathed his responsibility before God to be a witness to Christ in his family and to hopefully help others do the same thing. That's the legacy of Dr. Dobson. Those who attempt to lampoon him, to besmirch his character, to belittle the public statements that he made, and some of the worst of it is coming from the so-called Christian progressive left. These people are insane, frankly, in my opinion. They've totally lost perspective. Dr. Dobson is one of the great men in American history, and I certainly want to honor him, both from what I know on the inside. I know you do too, and that's the reason we wanted to do this program today. Any last thoughts from you, Steve?
Oh, I hope people, if anyone had any kind of disagreement with Dr. Dobson, I get it. I understand it. But I have a former pastor that I used to serve under, and he always had this saying, chew the meat, spit the bones. You look for the good and just say, yeah, I'm just going to, this over here, I don't agree with, whatever, but he's got this good stuff over here. And the man had so much good. He had so much good.
I think both of our lives were benefited working with him.
Without question.
There's no doubt about it.
I told him once in his office, I said, I look at you like I did one of my dad's brothers. My dad had a number of brothers, and they were all influential in my life in one way or another. And Dr. Dobson was just like an uncle to me. He had that kind of voice into my life, and the man was just special.
And fortunately for him, he gets to be in glory now and go to a reward, which I perceive will be great. But you know what he would say even about that? His reward's not necessarily any bigger or larger or better than anyone else's. The question he always asked himself is, am I honoring the Lord in my life right now? He had a big megaphone, and he had a well-known, he was a well-known person nationally, whether people thought of him positively or negatively. But he did not see that as important. He saw a relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ as the most important thing. He knew that notwithstanding all of that, his responsibility was to walk humbly with God. And he did that. And I saw it very well. So I saw it very clearly, and you did too. And that's why we wanted to take some time to honor him today. Steve Ryder, thank you so much,
love you, brother,
my friend, for taking some time. I think it was worthwhile doing.
I cannot wait to see you guys coming up very soon in Colorado.
That's right.
And
We're on our way out.
Maybe have a cigar or smoke a pipe with you and just kick back.
That's right.
Enjoy being in each other's presence again. We miss you here in Colorado, brother.
Well, listen, I'm a native Hoosier. I always tell people I'm from Indianapolis and run a little race there you might have heard of. But Colorado's my adopted home. I fell in love with Colorado. Folks on the family took me out there. I love Colorado so much and miss it. So, yeah, it's going to be good to see you, my friend.
Thanks, brother.
Thanks, brother. We'll talk soon. And, folks, thanks for joining us on the Conservative Caucus podcast. Thank you for joining the Conservative Caucus podcast today. What a great conversation with my friend, Steve Ryder. As we pulled away, just had some private conversation of how much we miss this great man, Dr. James Dobson. And we think we were able to get out to you both our personal reflections and some information that would be useful for you. And there are a lot of people, millions of people, who were greatly benefited by Dr. James Dobson and all he did. But of course, like we were talking about, the number one goal in his life was to honor and please Christ and to follow him faithfully. And by our judgment, he did that and is now in his reward with the Lord. So anyway, thank you for joining the Conservative Caucus podcast. Come to our website, theconservativecaucus.com, and leave us a message there. Give us information and ideas on how you would like us to handle this podcast, people that you'd like for us to have on, other feedback that you have as we're growing and building what we're doing here at the Conservative Caucus podcast. And of course, you can email us at info@theconservativecaucus.com. And again, go to our website with the same domain. We hope to hear you in the future, and join us again on future The Conservative Caucus podcasts.